On the night I got promoted, my husband admitted he was cheating with my intern. He used my login to sabotage my work and make himself look smarter. So I compiled security footage and system logs and delivered them to HR with a note titled, "Enjoy the show." The night I got promoted was supposed to be the happiest moment of my career. I'd spent 6 years clawing my way up in a competitive consulting firm in Chicago, surviving impossible clients, late nights, and subtle sexism from the kind of men who thought detail-oriented was code for secretary. But when my boss called my name during the quarterly dinner and announced my promotion to senior project lead, I swear I could barely breathe. I'd made it. My husband, Mark, was sitting at the table across from me, clapping with this half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. I thought maybe he was just overwhelmed. He'd been quiet lately, distant even, but I figured it was the stress from his own job in marketing. I toasted him after dinner, saying, "To us. Finally, both of us moving up." He clinked his glass, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Actually, there's something I need to tell you before you start celebrating too hard." We were in the parking garage when he said it. No preamble, no emotion, just, "I've been seeing someone for about 6 months. It's your intern, Sophie." At first, I laughed. It sounded insane. Sophie, the fresh-out-of-college intern who practically worshipped me, who took notes on how I ran meetings, asked for career advice, and baked cookies for the office. No. But then he said, "She supports my ego better than you ever did." And I felt my stomach drop like I'd stepped off a ledge. He said it so calmly, like he was explaining a budget report. I remember staring at him thinking, my husband is telling me this on the night of my promotion. He added that he didn't mean for it to happen, that it just made sense, and that he wanted to be honest before things went further. I didn't cry. I just got in my car and drove. When I got home, I poured a glass of wine and checked my work email to distract myself, and that's when I saw it. A system alert. Someone had logged into my account at 2 a.m. the night before. I hadn't been online. I clicked through the logs, tracing the IP address. It matched our home Wi-Fi. My stomach twisted. I opened my recent files and saw changes to one of my biggest projects, the one that had been mysteriously failing QA checks for weeks. Edits I hadn't made, typos, wrong data, things that made me look sloppy. The next morning at work, Sophie smirked at me during the team meeting, casually wearing his watch, the one I'd bought Mark for our anniversary. My boss pulled me aside afterward, saying he was putting me on performance review because several issues had been traced back to my credentials. That's when it clicked. The late-night logins, the sudden drop in my project performance, the way Sophie kept getting, coincidentally, assigned to shadow me. They had used my own account to sabotage me. I didn't scream. I didn't confront them, not yet. I went home, poured another glass of wine, and started digging. By the time the sun came up, I had compiled login data, timestamps, and access logs. I even found security footage from our shared workstations, showing him typing into my laptop after hours. And I delivered it all to someone very specific. Someone who'd been waiting for proof that something shady was going on. Someone who hated Mark and Sophie even more than I did. Mark and I met 8 years ago, back when we were both broke grad students sharing a rundown apartment in Wicker Park. He was charming then, funny, ambitious, always talking about how we'd build an empire together. I believed him. We were the kind of couple people described as a power duo in the making. When we got married, I was the one who landed the first serious job, an analyst role at a consulting firm. Mark bounced between marketing gigs, claiming he was waiting for the right opportunity. For years, I carried us financially while he worked on side projects that never went anywhere. I didn't complain. I thought marriage was about teamwork. When he finally got a solid position at a tech company 2 years ago, he started changing. He'd compare his company's fast-paced, visionary culture to mine, implying I was stuck in a corporate rut. I laughed it off until I realized he wasn't joking. He started dressing better, hitting the gym, staying out late, networking. Still, I didn't suspect an affair. I thought maybe he was finally becoming the man he'd always wanted to be. Then came Sophie. She joined my department last spring, bright, eager, and absurdly polished for someone fresh out of college. She reminded me of myself at that age, so I took her under my wing. I helped her with client presentations, introduced her to people who could help her career, even invited her and the other interns over for dinner once. That night, I noticed something small but strange. When Mark offered to pour wine, Sophie looked shy. Not awkward shy, like there was a private joke between them. I told myself I was imagining it. But little things started adding up. She'd quote things Mark supposedly said during those dinners I'd hosted, things I didn't remember him saying. She'd casually mention grabbing coffee with Mark about his marketing insights. I thought she just admired him. He had that magnetic charm when he wanted to. Around that same time, my projects began glitching. Reports would come back with missing data, client files got corrupted, and QA logs showed unauthorized edits. It said everything traced back to my login. I was mortified. I worked harder, stayed late, triple-checked everything, but the errors kept happening. Mark noticed my stress and said, "Maybe you're just overextending yourself. You can't control everything." I should have realized he was testing me. Then, about a month before my promotion, I noticed he'd started keeping his phone face down. He said it was to reduce distractions. Sophie started dressing differently too, bolder clothes, more confident. And during one meeting, I caught her watching me with that tiny smirk again, like she knew something I didn't. I told myself she was just young and insecure. I was her boss. Maybe she felt intimidated. But the night I found that security footage, the video of Mark sitting at my desk, entering my credentials, I felt everything fall into place. The failed reports, the review warning, the subtle jabs from my boss about focus. They hadn't just cheated, they'd planned this. Together, I didn't know whether to scream or throw up. Instead, I copied everything, login logs, timestamps, video stills, and put them all on an encrypted USB drive. I printed the audit trail too, and I delivered it to the one person who had the power to ruin both of them in one stroke. Someone they'd both underestimated completely. The person I delivered everything to was Jenna, our department's senior compliance officer. Most people tiptoe around her because she's blunt, suspicious, and terrifyingly good at finding corruption. But I knew one thing Mark and Sophie didn't. Jenna hated them both. Months earlier, I'd overheard Sophie mock Jenna after a meeting, calling her a washed-up paper pusher. And Mark. He'd made a presentation at a joint networking event where he called compliance the Department of No. Jenna remembered. She never forgot slights like that. So when I showed up at her office with a folder of evidence, login trails, video timestamps, and a full breakdown of the sabotage pattern, she didn't even ask why. She just said, "Sit down and start from the top." I told her everything. Every suspicious login, every file tampered with, every time Sophie volunteered to help with one of my projects right before something went wrong. I didn't mention the affair yet. I wanted her to see the professional betrayal first. Jenna's expression didn't change the whole time. When I was done, she said, "You realize this is corporate fraud, right?" I nodded. My voice shook when I said, "And it's personal." That night, she had lock both Mark's and Sophie's access credentials for a routine audit. I didn't warn them. I went to work the next morning like nothing happened. By noon, Sophie was pacing near her desk, pale and sweating. Mark kept calling her. I heard him whispering in the hallway, "Just stay calm, don't talk to anyone." My boss called an emergency meeting that afternoon. He looked confused, trying to be diplomatic as he said there'd been some anomalies discovered in our systems. Sophie stared at me the whole time, her face tight. Mark sat across from me, pretending to be supportive, his hand on my shoulder as if he hadn't detonated my career weeks earlier. That was the moment I decided I wasn't done. I didn't just want them exposed. I wanted them destroyed the way they'd tried to destroy me. But things got even worse before they got better. 2 days later, Jenna called me into her office again. She looked grim. "You were right," she said, "but you need to see this." She pulled up an internal audit report. It showed my personal projects had been repeatedly flagged by our system for client data mishandling. Not just sabotage, misuse of confidential information. The kind of violation that could end a career, or worse, open up criminal liability. Someone was sending client data to an external address, she said. Guess which account they used? My stomach dropped. Mine. I had thought they were just trying to ruin my reputation. But this wasn't about jealousy or petty revenge anymore. They were trying to frame me for a data breach. The kind that would get me blacklisted from the entire industry. Jenna's words echoed in my head all day. "If this hadn't been caught, you'd be finished." That night, I sat in the dark in our apartment, watching Mark type on his laptop from the reflection in the TV screen. Calm, casual, confident, like a man who believed he'd already won. I thought about confronting him right there, but something in me snapped instead. I realized that emotional confrontation was what he wanted, something he could twist, use against me. So I smiled, went to bed, and the next morning I acted like nothing had changed. But inside, I started building something far colder, because I had just found a new weapon, and it was going to end both of them. Jenna put the audit report down and watched me like she was waiting for me to pass out. Instead, I asked one stupid question: who paid them? She didn't look surprised. She slid a printout across her desk, bank transfers, small but regular, labeled with a company name I didn't recognize. The dates lined up with the nights my account showed logins. The amounts weren't huge, not enough to retire on, but steady. Enough to bribe a gaslit kid fresh out of college and to keep a middle manager in a comfortable lie. The transfers hit Mark's account. Not once, not twice, dozens of times over 6 months. I remember the room tilting. I could feel my pulse in my throat. "He took money," the words left me like I'd been shoved. "Yes," Jenna said. "And he's not the only one who isn't who you think." She opened another folder, and this time it was Sophie's resume, or at least what had been submitted to HR. The address was fake. The references were ghosts. Sophie had been onboarded through an external staffing firm that specialized in contract placements. The firm's listed contact person, my boss's name. "You're joking," I said, but there was no humor in it. Jenna clicked through a string of emails between my boss and that staffing company. The tone was clinical. The subject lines were antiseptic enough to hide intention. Resource allocation, candidate placement. Underneath, lines that were not meant for me. "Make sure she's assigned to Murphy's team, we need her clothes. He's on board, use him sparingly." My mouth went dry. The room shrank. My boss, the man who'd called me detail-oriented in front of clients, the man who'd patted my shoulder and told me to be patient, had hired a plant. He'd paid Mark to sabotage my projects and used a fake intern to act like a mole. It wasn't jealousy. It was a promotion plot. Jenna clicked to another file, and that last click landed with the force of a fist. There were emails between Mark and my boss, not florid love notes, not whispers of an affair. Transaction confirmations, calendar invites with money-sending confirmations, notes like "paid per sabotage, keep it clean." Mark had signed one of them. Acknowledged. Everything I'd thought the affair was a personal betrayal, the small-town cruelty of a husband taking a younger woman, swelled into something far worse. He hadn't been cheating for ego alone. He'd been complicit in a corporate scheme to manufacture justification for my removal, and then promote someone completely controllable. My husband had been hired, in a fashion, to ruin me. I pictured the watch on Sophie's wrist, the anniversary watch I'd bought Mark, and realized I had been looking at petty symbols when the real currency was invoices and signed emails. I felt sick, not just at the betrayal, but at the way I'd misread every tiny humiliation for months. Every support my ego laugh, every late-night networking excuse. He'd been paid to hurt me. Jenna leaned forward. "We can take this to legal and the board. We can put both of them under formal investigation. But you need to be ready. If we push this, it's not just Mark and Sophie you'll be up against. Your boss will fight. And he has influence." My hands were cold on the folder. I thought about walking out, about finding Mark in the kitchen and choking the truth out of him with my bare hands. But Jenna wasn't offering catharsis. She was offering war. "If we expose him," she said, "there'll be collateral. He'll try to destroy you with whatever he can. He'll call in favors. He'll get creative." I thought of the flagged client data, the near breach he nearly framed me for, the review already hanging over my head. I thought of all the small ways he'd minimized me in front of partners, the times he'd smiled when I missed a deadline he'd secretly sabotaged. I thought of Mark's face in the security footage, the casual arrogance as he typed my password. I could feel something inside me settle, a cold focus I hadn't let myself keep in years. "Do it," I said. My voice was steadier than I felt. "Expose them." Jenna nodded, but I could see it, a caution she didn't bother hiding. "One more thing," she said, eyes hard. "I need full access to your devices and passwords. If we're going to take him down, we have to make sure he can't gaslight us with another fake audit." I stared at her. The offer was sensible, necessary, Vulnerable, I signed the consent form. Then I walked out of her office and into a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and fear. I had one weapon now, evidence. I had one ally who wasn't afraid to use it. But I also had the knowledge that my husband had taken a paycheck to betray me, and that realization hurt in a way revenge alone might not fix. I went home that night with my hands empty and my head full of plans. I didn't know yet how I would win, only that I had to. When Jenna said we go slow and smart, she meant it. There was no cinematic confrontation, no dramatic throwdown in the living room. There was paperwork, calendar blocking, and a lot of quiet cruelty disguised as competence. It felt like learning to assemble a bomb out of staplers and spreadsheets, precise, clinical, and terrifyingly intimate. Jenna pulled me into a war room, a tiny conference room with a whiteboard and 2 chairs, where she laid out everything like a prosecutor. "We're not just proving they did it," she said. "We're proving motive, means, and that your boss orchestrated it. We also need to make sure any evidence we collect will hold up if he lawyers up." She spoke with that dry efficiency I'd always admired in her, the same efficiency I'd once mistaken for coldness. Now it was my only ally. First step was containment. Jenna had it freeze any account associated with the staffing firm and requested a full forensic image of my work machine and Mark's company laptop. I handed over my home laptop, my phone, everything. It felt invasive, and it was, but I wasn't sentimental about devices anymore. They were evidence. We planned narrative control next. Jenna insisted that I not tell anyone outside legal and compliance. No friends, no parents, no coworkers. "People leak," she said bluntly, "and he'll use any loose thread to discredit you." I had to act normal at work. Smile in meetings, assign tasks, be Murphy the steady hand. She even coached me on the language, neutral, factual, no melodrama. It hurt, pretending not to care while someone else was erasing my life with a few keystrokes and a wristwatch. Jenna also wanted to bait them. Not with traps so obvious they'd smell them a mile away, but with small, controlled vulnerabilities we could trace. We created a decoy project, a low-stakes internal pilot with deliberately seeded, fake client data that looked real enough to alarm anyone who tried to manipulate it. We gave Sophie a visible role on paper, the kind that would tempt an accomplice to slip in and help. If someone used my credentials to touch the decoy files, we'd have a clean read. IP address, timestamps, and the hands on the keyboard. That night I sat in our kitchen, the decoy project open on my laptop like an altar. Mark came home smelling like cologne and microwave dinners, smiling like nothing had happened. He asked about my day. I told him the usual: meetings, timelines, a client who wanted to streamline efficiencies. He nodded and said, "You look tired." He reached out to touch my arm. I pulled away and smiled the smooth, corporate smile Jenna taught me. "Just the usual," I said. "All under control." Jenna lined up allies next: legal, HR, and a quiet outside investigator she trusted. Each person would play a role in corroborating the timeline if my boss tried to gaslight the board. We scheduled a preliminary meeting with legal for 2 weeks out, precisely long enough to gather more proof, but short enough that we wouldn't give the predators time to manufacture more lies. I also started rewriting my public persona. I posted nothing controversial on social media. I cleaned up client emails and CC'd more people to create a visible paper trail. I let others praise me in meetings instead of deflecting. It felt performative, which it was, but it also built an armor of ordinary competency that my boss would find harder to puncture in a smear campaign. At home, Mark grew bolder. He began leaving receipts in plain view, new clothes on the chair, the sort of careless arrogance that comes from thinking you've won. Sophie, meanwhile, started texting from office hours, asking for quick advice after I'd shadowed her in a meeting. I answered politely, deliberately, and monitored everything. On a Wednesday at 3:12 a.m., the decoy file was accessed from our office network. The log flagged a user authentication under my credentials at 3:12 a.m. The forensic image gave us more: a MAC address tied to Mark's phone hotspot. The security camera captured a silhouette at the desk, broad shoulders, a slow, familiar way of leaning over the keyboard. I felt a strange calm when Jenna sent the snapshots to legal. It wasn't victory yet. It was the sound of a machine starting. The retaliation was no longer abstract. It had teeth. But even as the net tightened, a cold, sharp thought slipped in. We were playing with people's livelihoods, reputations, and marriages. I had crossed a line from defense to offense. That knowledge should have made me hesitate. Instead, it hardened me. Because the only thing I wanted now wasn't just to clear my name. It was to see them lose everything they'd planned for me to lose. I thought I had the whole map. I had screenshots, IP logs, receipts with Mark's name on them, Sophie's fake resume, and an inbox full of my boss's little transactions. I felt like a survivor who'd finally found the footprints of the people who stomped on her life. I thought I knew who I needed to hit. Then legal called me in a week later and set that map on fire. They'd been doing their own digging while Jenna and I played patient. What legal handed me was neat, clinical, and somehow worse. The transfers to Mark's account didn't originate from my boss directly. They'd been funneled through a series of shell companies. The final origin? A private equity firm with a reputation for buying underperforming consultancies, gutting senior staff, and flipping them for enormous fees. Small, steady sums, the kind a corporate slush fund could pour out without blinking. Not petty bribery, investment-level manipulation. I remember my stomach dropping into my shoes. "So he's taking money from investors?" I asked, but the look on Legal's face told me it was uglier than that. Money was the symptom, not the disease. Then Legal slid another file across the table, and my hands shook as I opened it. An email chain between my boss, one of the PE firm's liaisons, and worst of all, a name I recognized from the boardroom but had never thought of as dirty: our CEO. The subject line read bluntly, "Restructure plan, remove independent players." The body spelled it out with corporate calm. "We need cleanable leadership, no rogue decision-makers, and chillingly, Murphy's role is a blocker." There were attached notes. A timeline, suggested PR narratives for firing a leader, and a line item budgeted for personnel realignment incentives. I stared until there were gray spots in my vision. This wasn't some jealous husband scenario anymore. This was a house cleanout. They didn't want me because I was difficult or because I irritated the right people. They wanted me out so the company could be remade into something they could sell. People would make millions off my exile. And the strangest, most stinging betrayal. Sophie's name was on an executive calendar invite as observer, but her email trace led back to the same temp firm. The PE liaison used to move contractors into the company. She wasn't just an intern. She was an insertion, a placeholder, a tactic. The watch on her wrist, the smug little symbol of my private life, was, it turned out, a planted flourish. A provocation they'd decided would hurt me without tracing back to anyone obvious. But the twist that made my hands go numb was this: someone above them had warned Legal. A whisper, an anonymous tip that said, "There is a coordinated plan to destabilize certain managers to favor acquisition. Check project flags and staffing placements." The Teepster's IP, it traced back to Jenna's office. I felt my throat close then because Jenna had been my savior and my co-conspirator, and now maybe, she'd been more than that. Legal didn't accuse her. They didn't need to. They told me they were following every lead and that the board would convene if the paper trail stayed clean. But they also looked at me like I was fragile glass. That night, I went home and watched Mark fall asleep on the couch with his phone face down like a guilty animal. I wanted to pull the phone away, peel it open, see the transaction details, the calendar invites. I wanted to scream and throw everything he loved into the trash. Instead, I sat very still and let the new truth settle in. Whoever had paid him wasn't just paying for sabotage. They were buying a clean sale. Whoever had inserted Sophie into my life had been patient and methodical, and had used my marriage as leverage. I thought about Jenna's cold focus and Legal's cautious words, and realized I was a small piece inside a machine that was hungry and vast. This wasn't petty office cruelty. It was premeditated corporate cannibalism. If I pulled the thread too hard, the whole company could come undone, and people would get hurt in ways I hadn't imagined. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It contained a photograph of my boss at a gala with a man I recognized from the PE firm, smiling, arms around each other, oblivious. The caption below it was typed in all caps, "Stop." I looked at the picture until my eyes blurred. Someone had just told me to stop digging, and I had a folder full of proof that the person I loved had taken money to destroy me. I realized the next step wouldn't be about exposing a cheating husband or an opportunistic intern. It would be about choosing whether to pull the company's ropes and risk everything, my career, my safety, people's livelihoods, just to watch them fall. I closed the folder and felt the cold part of myself stand up like armor. Because if they wanted me out to make a sale, I could make the price too high to pay. The truth came to me the way rot comes through wood, slow, silent, and impossible to ignore once you see it. Jenna called me in late on a Friday, after everyone had gone home. She looked tired for the first time since this started. She shut the blinds, locked the door, and said, "You deserve to know what this really was." She handed me a printed memo from months earlier, before any of this mess had started. It was marked Confidential, Strategic DOWNSIZING Plan. My name was on it, highlighted, next to the words Replace with Vendor Asset. She didn't say anything for a full minute, just let me read. The memo was written by my boss and co-signed by the CEO. It outlined a pilot restructuring initiative funded by the private equity firm. The goal was to demonstrate cost savings by streamlining leadership redundancies. Translation: fire high-salaried senior staff like me and replace us with cheaper contractors who'd follow orders without question. But there was one line that made my stomach twist so hard I almost dropped the paper. Target, Murphy. Controlled termination scenario recommended. Utilize performance degradation strategy to justify review. Use internal contact, M for access. Confirm replacement shadow S in place prior to removal. Internal contact, M. Shadow S, Mark, Sophie. My husband and my intern had been assets in a corporate hit list. Jenna explained it flatly, like she'd rehearsed it. The company had been preparing to sell to the private equity group for nearly a year. My department was too profitable, too visible, and too independent, meaning I had too much leverage in negotiations. The CEO wanted someone pliable leading it. My boss needed to prove he could deliver that obedience. So he fed me to the wolves. Mark was recruited through a mutual contact at the firm. They offered him consulting incentives to feed them access and sabotage details from home. He justified it to himself as side work. He told them I'd never notice, that I kept everything saved locally. He was paid every month through a marketing consultancy shell he thought was legitimate. When Sophie entered the picture, she was told her role was temporary data coordination, not knowing she'd become bait, until she got involved with him. Then she understood her real job. Get close to me, mirror me, and make sure my downfall looked self-inflicted. I asked Jenna why she was telling me this. Her voice didn't shake, but her jaw was tight. Because the board's about to get the acquisition papers. If you want to burn them, you have to do it now. I couldn't speak. My brain kept replaying Mark's words from that night. She supports my ego better than you ever did. It wasn't even about love. It wasn't about lust or validation. It was about power. He hadn't chosen Sophie because he cared about her. He'd chosen her because she was convenient, a distraction and a tool. He'd sold me out for a paycheck and a bit of flattery. And he'd looked me in the eye every morning, poured my coffee, kissed me goodbye while pretending nothing was wrong. I asked Jenna, why didn't they just fire me? She met my eyes. Because you were too good. If they fired you without cause, they'd owe you severance and look suspicious to the board. But if they made it your fault, if it looked like incompetence, they could sell your removal as a performance issue. Clean, profitable, painless? Except it hadn't been painless. They'd taken everything I'd built, my projects, my name, my husband, and turned it into ammunition. They'd made me the villain in my own career. I sat there staring at the memo, at my name printed next to the words Replace with Vendor Asset. I felt something inside me settle, hard and steady. It wasn't grief anymore. It wasn't even rage. It was the quiet certainty that they had made one final mistake. They'd underestimated how far I was willing to go when I had nothing left to lose. Jenna watched me carefully. If you want to expose them, she said, you'll have to go public. It'll be messy. It'll take them all down, the CEO, your boss, your husband, that firm. You'll never work here again. I folded the memo neatly and said, good. Because I finally understood the reason behind all of it. Why my husband smiled while he ruined me, why Sophie smirked in meetings, why my boss fed lies to the board. It wasn't about me at all. I was just leverage, a dollar sign on a spreadsheet. And now they were going to learn what it costs to treat a person like that. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the kitchen with my laptop, the memo open beside me, the house silent except for the hum of the refrigerator. I thought about everything they'd taken, my trust, my reputation, my marriage, and realized they'd built their little empire on one assumption: that I'd stay quiet to save face, that I'd protect the company's image, protect Mark, protect myself. They didn't understand that there's a point where shame burns out and something colder takes its place. At dawn, I called Jenna. "We're not just going to legal," I said. "We're going public." By noon, I'd uploaded every piece of evidence we had: the memo, the payment records, the internal emails, and the footage of Mark logging into my account, to a private, time-stamped drive. Jenna helped me anonymize the metadata and prepare a clean, legally compliant report. We sent it simultaneously to 3 places: the company's board of directors, the state's Business Oversight Division, the Chicago Tribune's investigative desk. By the time Mark came home that evening, his phone was already vibrating nonstop. He walked in looking confused, his tie loose, his face pale. "What did you do?" he asked. I didn't even look at him. "I told the truth." He started to deny it, to reach for that calm manipulator tone he always used, but his phone lit up again, a call from his boss. His expression cracked. He went upstairs, took the call, and when he came down 20 minutes later, he looked 10 years older. "They're launching an internal review," he said, voice trembling. "They froze my accounts." I didn't say a word. 2 days later, the Tribune article hit. The headline read, "Whistleblower exposes sabotage for sale scheme inside Chicago consulting firm." It didn't name me directly, Jenna made sure of that, but everyone in the company knew. The story detailed a coordinated internal effort to discredit a senior project lead for the benefit of a pending acquisition. It mentioned an employee's spouse and a falsified intern record. It cited verified internal communications and financial transactions. By 5 p.m. that day, the CEO resigned to spend time with family. My boss was escorted out by security within the hour. Sophie's work badge was deactivated before lunch. The staffing firm she came from was under investigation. Mark tried to beg. He cried, actually cried for the first time in years, saying he didn't realize how far it would go, that he just wanted to help. He said he'd been promised a payout once the acquisition went through. "You were going to be rich," he said, "and I was tired of feeling small next to you." That's when I finally looked at him. "You didn't feel small because of me," I said. "You felt small because you are." He moved out the next morning. I didn't stop him. The firm publicly canceled the acquisition after the investigation widened. The board quietly reinstated me, not out of guilt, but out of fear. Jenna was promoted to head of compliance. She offered to help me sue, but I didn't want their money. I wanted their silence. So I negotiated a resignation package that included a full public exoneration, plus a clause preventing any of them from speaking my name in interviews or references again. When the dust settled, I left Chicago. I took a new position in Seattle, smaller firm, smaller office, more control. Sometimes, when I walk home from work past the water, I think about that watch on Sophie's wrist, the one I once thought was the symbol of betrayal. Now it just reminds me how cheap they all were. People keep asking me how I survived it, losing a husband, a career, and half my life in one blow. I tell them I didn't survive it. I replaced it. And the best part? The private equity firm eventually bought my old company for half of what they'd planned, after the scandal gutted its reputation. Every executive who'd signed that memo had to accept the terms at a massive personal loss. I framed a copy of the article about the deal on my new office wall. Right beside it, I keep one of the old access badges from my previous job, the one they deactivated the night they thought they'd erased me. It's a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't ruining them, it's outlasting them, and I did.